Mastering predictions. Harnessing the power of should and ought to. Hello, language learners. Welcome back to another episode of our Advanced Vocabulary series. Today, we're diving deep into the world of predicting and hypothesizing. Our focus will be on two key language structures, should and ought to. These structures are frequently used in both academic and professional contexts when making predictions, so understanding them can really give your English a boost. So, let's start with should. In English, we often use should when we are making a prediction about something that we think is likely to happen in the future. When we use should, it suggests that there is a good reason or evidence for believing that the event will occur. Here's an example for you. The experiment should work because we followed all the steps correctly. In this case, the speaker predicts that the experiment will work, based on the evidence of having followed all the steps. Now, it's your turn. Think about something you're doing right now and make a prediction about it using should. Moving on, let's discuss ought to. Like, should, ought to, is also used to make predictions about things that are likely to happen. However, it's slightly more formal than should, and is less commonly used in everyday conversation. But it's still important, especially in academic and professional writing. For instance, the stock market ought to stabilize once the new economic policy is in place. Here, ought to is used to predict that the stock market will stabilize, based on the introduction of a new economic policy. Your task now is to come up with a sentence using ought to. Imagine a scenario and predict what's likely to happen next. Now, you may be wondering about the difference between should and ought to. Both are used to indicate a likely event in the future, but remember, ought to is slightly more formal. In addition, while should is used in negative forms and questions, ought to is not commonly used in these ways. For instance, we'd usually say, it shouldn't rain tomorrow, rather than, it ought not to rain tomorrow. Try to differentiate these two in your practice. Write down a couple of examples where you use should and ought to in different contexts. And there we have it. Today, we explored how to use should and ought to when making predictions in English. Remember, practice makes perfect, so don't shy away from creating your own sentences and predictions using these structures. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. I hope you found this video helpful and now feel more comfortable predicting and hypothesizing in English. Stay tuned for our next session where we'll continue exploring advanced vocabulary. Until then, happy learning!